I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon and sharing your time and efforts in the creation of the first community-wide climate action plan for the city of Houston. As co-chair of the U.S. Climate Mayors, climate action and sustainability are priorities of mine, and quite frankly, they are priorities for the city of Houston. And I am thrilled to see so many of our partners and residents here today sharing the priorities. In fact, over the last several months, we have had over 700 people participating in this process that's culminating in today's presentation. Houston is a proud member of the C40 network, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with cities across the globe, committing to fighting climate change and sharing the ways that Houston is innovating to reduce carbon emissions. In fact, I just had a meeting today with some people from Austin where the focus is on clean tech, and they are looking at coming from or expanding from Boston to Houston, and I had an opportunity to talk to them about what's happening here in the city of Houston. So thank you, Houston Advanced Research Center, for partnering with us this past year, and thank you to CenterPoint Energy for your sponsorship. CenterPoint is a great partner, and we appreciate its support for the city's energy efficiency and vehicle electrification work, and its investment in a more sustainable future overall for the city of Houston. So thank you, CenterPoint. And I would also like to extend a special thank you to those who volunteered their time and expertise to serve on a Houston Climate Action Plan working group this spring. In particular, I would like to thank our working group chairs, and I know I'm going to mess up on some of these names, so let me thank you in advance for overlooking me. Angela Sheen and Bruce, is that Will Coxon? To Marlene Galfred and Rives Taylor, to Roxanne Barone and Wesley, is that Land, Y-L-A-N-D, and then to Harrison Humphreys and Bruce Race. The draft climate action plan we are releasing today is the product of the working group's analysis of cities' operations and policies across the country, and over 30 public meetings held by my sustainability office and feedback from more than 700 Houstonians. And I certainly want to acknowledge Tina Pius over ARA. Where's Tina? Oh, Tina's all the way in the back. Thank you and your entire group, Lara Cottingham and others, thank you all for the leadership that you all have provided. We are about halfway through the planning process with the goal of releasing a final draft plan in December of this year. Today's draft is still a draft, and your support and feedback are critical to our work. I call upon each and every one of you to review the draft recommendations and please share with us your feedback. Floods, extreme heat, and poor air quality are all made worse by climate change, taking a toll on our health and safety as well as on our infrastructure. If we don't take any action on climate change, the average number of days in Houston with a heat index above 105 degrees will jump from 10 to 74 days by 2065. We also know that climate change is increasing our flood risk with increased frequency and intensity of storms. We can't fix the problem overnight, but if we take bold actions to lead our city on a sustainable path, we'll leave behind a better Houston for future generations. And reducing our emissions will help fight climate change and also create more resilient communities, reduce harmful pollution, cut energy waste, and boost the local economy. Our plan for the city as we move forward is to build a stronger, more resilient, and more sustainable city. This plan will also help us prepare for the rapid population growth we are expecting in the greater Houston region. And growth provides Houston with a tremendous economic opportunity, but will result in greater projected emissions. As a community, we need to increase renewable energy generated inside the city, invest in green infrastructure, and work together to maintain and build upon our status and the energy capital of the world. Now that Houston has a growing startup scene and is the largest municipal user of renewable energy in the country, we need to be a global center for energy innovation to ensure that we grow and attract businesses at the forefront of the energy industry for years to come. We need to invest in programs to make buildings more efficient, improve cost savings, and nurture a more competitive local workforce. And lastly, we need to make it easier for Houstonians to use multiple modes of transportation, to walk and bike to more places, and convert their cars to electric and low-emission vehicles. We must continue to work with partners to innovate and invest in mobility and affordable housing opportunities that promote greater equity as well as inclusion. And we need to reduce waste we send to our landfills. This plan sets out many ambitious goals we will work to achieve over the coming years, and with our network of dedicated partners and innovative spirit, I am confident Houston will rise to the challenge. And thank you so very much. I look forward to launching this plan with you. And at this time, let me bring up Lara Cottingham.
So I want everybody to, before he leaves, really thank Mayor Turner for his leadership on taking climate action and launching the City of Houston's first ever community-wide climate action plan. Right? So I am Lara Cottingham. I am the City of Houston's Chief Sustainability Officer. I want to really quick give a huge shout out to everyone on our team, for Tina and Nick and Larissa, who's not here, from ARA, Gavin and Marina and Meredith from HARC. We have Henna, who is on loan to us from Harvard and MIT, and Michael, who was part of Team Climate Action Plan from Centerpoint. I couldn't have done this without everybody. I also want to, as the mayor said, thank everyone who is in this room who was part of our original Stakeholder Advisory Committee, right? We started this back in January, and many of you have been in all of our working groups since then. You've probably seen a version of this presentation so many times that you could give it yourself. And we really couldn't have done the work that we are sharing today without your help. It's also really exciting to see all of the new faces that weren't here earlier, right? As the mayor said, 700 people have signed up. The word is out that we're working on a climate action plan. And that is really important because what we are here today to do is to release the first draft, right? It's not final. The goal is to have a final report due in the end of this year. So there's plenty of time still to comment and get feedback. Because in a city as big as Houston and as diverse as Houston, and that has the unique challenges that we have, to be a truly successful community-wide plan, we need a lot of community-wide input and feedback, right? So what we are putting out today is the result of a lot of hard work, but there's still a lot more hard work to go, and we really want everyone in this room to go through and look at it, and then share it with all of your friends, and give us all of the feedback that you possibly can. The draft, as it stands today, is about 126-ish actions, which I will not be reading to you all. I'm going to go through what we have done so far, what is new, what is next, and then leave time for questions at the end, because I know you guys will have questions. We have all of this information online. Like I said, it's pretty lengthy, and there's also a really great feedback form, so you can go through and provide your comment. And with that, we'll get started, right? So this slide looks familiar to some of you because it talks about Houston's commitment to climate action. Our commitment to climate action is not new to the city. This is something that mayors going back, Mayor Parker, Mayor White, Mayor Brown have been working on. We use more renewable energy than any other city in the country, right? We have a solar farm in West Texas. We've been using electric vehicles for almost a decade now. But what really helped change the way we talk about climate started with the proposed withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement 2 years ago. That action was a spark that really sent cities into action, and Mayor Turner is co-chair of a group called Climate Mayors that helped lead that rallying cry. What we've seen since the federal government stepped down is that cities have really stepped up, right? Climate Mayors, this group of mayors, red state, blue state, big city, small city, was originally 36 mayors. Today, it's 427 mayors. right? We got our first mayor from Mississippi. We're still looking for mayors from North and South Dakota. If anyone has a connection, please let me know. But that shows you the size and the momentum and the change that's happened in such a short period of time. These cities are all together. We've all committed to the Paris Agreement, and your climate action plan is part of the answer to what does that mean. On a more personal level, right, another action here at home was Hurricane Harvey. It impacted everyone. It impacted this building. It's not just Harvey, but it's our series of flooding, right, over and over again. But if you're here in Houston, if you're in the cities, there were wildfires on the western half of the country. There's a heat wave going around on the center and east part of the country. If it's a bomb cyclone, if it's, every single city has some kind of event, and cities are at the forefront. We are the front lines, and we're all stepping up, and we're all in this together. The goal of the plan matches with the goal of the Paris Agreement. That's net carbon neutrality by 2050, right? This is the same shared goal that all of those cities that you saw on that map have. And then down here, it shows our most recent emissions inventory, right? It shows where the emissions are generated and kind of where we stand today. And what's important is that we look at the emissions that are generated within the city limits of Houston, and we look at everything. So it's not just the city operations, it's my car, it's your home, your apartment, your business, right? And this is a community-wide climate action plan, and so we talk about community-wide actions. What is a climate action plan, right? So at a very basic level, it's like a math equation. You calculate where the emissions come from on one side, and then you look at your current programs, you measure their emissions reduction, and then you find the gaps, and you find areas where you need new programs or where you need to maybe invest in more programs, or is there a policy or regulatory change that needs to take place. And while we're talking about the emissions reduction, and it gets very technical, there's also very real, what we call co-benefits or just impacts that you're gonna face. And when we talk about climate change and we're talking about 2050, that can seem really far away. But things like air quality, improved mobility, reduced energy costs, improving our general quality of life and resilience, those are all things that you'll see immediate improvements on once we get started. And then what's also important to talk about is that this is not all new, right? So much is being done in our community in terms of climate action already. We don't maybe necessarily talk about it that way, but if you look at this list, all of these things that are current programs either within the city or maybe within the community are doing actions that will reduce our emissions. What we see the climate action plan to do is we want to work with these groups and we want to hopefully find a way to support them, to make all of these groups work together more, and show how if you look at it through a lens of climate, we can get that level of interconnectivity and support and resilience that we're all trying to build. Also, this is a list that we've put together, but if you and your organization are like, I'm doing something that should be up on there, please let us know, right? The more the merrier. We want to include and we really want to support and uplift the good work that's being done in Houston. A lot of times people think climate change, Houston, energy capital of the world. I don't think that's possible. And this list shows you absolutely it is possible, right? And so this is part of telling our community story together and changing that narrative of Houston and climate. So these slides talk a little bit about how we actually put the draft plan together. And it truly is a data and a stakeholder-driven process. So at one level, that means we didn't just make this up, right? It's based in science and fact and a lot of community input. Because what we have found historically in Houston is that for something to work, you really need to have the stakeholders and the community come forward and say, would this work here, yes or no? And so we start with that greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which tells you where your emissions are coming from. Then we share that with the community. We share that with our stakeholders, with our working groups. And we set them out and said, come up with strategies that will help us reduce these numbers. And we gave them all the information we had. We gave them what other cities are doing, and we asked them to figure out a way to Houstonify it, right? How can we do that here? And they gave us great recommendations, many, 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 many recommendations, many pages of recommendations, which we appreciate. And then, we also had a lot of stakeholder engagement for the folks who weren't necessarily part of our working groups, right? We had 30 public meetings all across the city. Our working groups met at least 25 times. They probably met more than that. We had over 100 meetings with folks who reached out and said, I want to learn more about this, maybe not publicly. There's still a lot of, what is a climate action plan? How is that going to impact me, right? And this is not a finished process. We will continue the stakeholder engagement. We have an open invitation. If anyone wants us to come talk about what we've done so far and what we want to keep doing, please let us know. And then this is the result, right? We talked about you take those emissions, you come up with strategies, right? And then we put them in a program called Pathways to measure the emissions reduction potential. So that tells you how much an improvement you would see for each one. That helps you prioritize, and then it helps you ultimately plan. And so this graph is my favorite. It tells you so many things. So it tells you, first of all, what will happen if we do nothing, right? So that baseline top line is a very conservative estimate of if we just keep going as usual. The bottom line is our goal, right? And that's so important that it's our goal. It shows you that it's a goal for 2050, right? It's not an immediate goal. This is not, as soon as we publish this is what we expect to happen in 2020, right? This is a long-term strategy. And then it also shows you the biggest areas where we can see improvement, right? It should come as no surprise that transportation is at the top of that list, right? We are such a car city. We have a ton of transportation going on here, not just the cars you and I drive, but we are at the hub of major transportation crossroads, right? So there's the people who don't even stop in Houston, but they're on their way from Florida to California. We count them as well. But the good news to all of this is that factored in is what we anticipate to change in technology. And technology is on our side. Everything is becoming more efficient. We talk a lot about electric vehicles right now because that's something that's been on the forefront. And right now, almost everyone is kind of coming together saying, yes, we think this is now really the time. And that's where you're going to see some of those huge changes. And you're really going to see that in cities like Houston because we have so many cars, right? We talk a lot about Metro and all of the amazing things that they are doing, right? Going back to that slide of the complementary programs, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We want to support the things that are out there. And so absolutely fully funding and supporting Metro to its fullest extent, and how we can build the most robust public transit system is essential to this. Even if you personally never take public transit, it is in your best interest for our community, right, that we support that and we build it out as best we can. Also important is that if you look in that far corner, we don't get to 100% by 2050. And that's okay, right? No city today knows how we 100% hit that goal. Part of that is because technology hasn't caught up with us yet. We know it will, but what will that look like? I'm not going to tell you. Who could have predicted the iPhone or Uber or Tinder or, all kinds of neat new things that we have. What's going to be the next thing? Not sure, but we know things are going to change. And also, just because you don't know 100% how you're going to get there doesn't mean you shouldn't try, right? And part of the Paris Agreement is saying that we recognize this as a challenge and we all accept it and we're all going to work together. So then the next part of this presentation goes through the actual draft of the climate action plan. I will go through it pretty quickly. It's all online and it's much, much, much more detailed. But this will give you an idea of the 4 areas that we focus on. These are the 4 areas where emissions come from. So we talk about transportation, we talk about energy transition, which really covers our power generation and electricity grid, because you can have the most efficient all of these other systems, but if you're still using a lot of coal and you could be using more cleaner power, right, you will never see those emissions benefits that we're hoping for. We talk about building optimization, which is also a big part of our emissions here in Houston. And we talk about materials management, which looks at our entire waste cycle and how we can divert and just use less in the beginning. So starting off with transportation, right? Our high-level goals break down into strategies that then break down into actions. So it gets more and more detailed. Again, please look online. I am not going to read them to you. We would be here till tomorrow. But the high-level goals are to shift our regional fleet to electric vehicles and alternative renewable fuels. We've talked a lot about what the city of Houston is doing personally, but we recognize that to move that needle, there needs to be action in the community. So we've created something called the Evolve Houston Coalition, which will do just that. Right? You will be hearing more about that, but that's an example of how we work with the community to try and get more and more adoption and transition to electrification. We talk about reducing vehicle miles traveled per capita. We have a lot of programs on this already, so we're really enforcing what's out there. We look at this from both an actual transit, how do we get more multimodal transit, how do we get more bike lanes, but also how do we build more transit-oriented development and communities. And we talk about equitable mobility. Equity is something that came up throughout the entire process, and it is built into all of the actions and strategies that you'll see, but it's really important when we talk about transportation, because when we talk about Teslas and when we talk about apps and things like that, we have to make sure that if it is the next best thing, everyone in the community has access to it. Otherwise, you're going to leave people out, and you're never going to have the adoption and the ridership that you really want. And that's something that is more, it's a public-private project that we'll work on. And it also talks a lot about safety, because at the very base level, you want your public transportation to be as safe as possible. Otherwise, no one's going to use it, and you have invested a lot, and you won't have moved much further than you were. In energy transition, our goals are to increase local solar generation and storage. So the city of Houston has the highest solar potential according to Google. That means there's a lot of opportunity for rooftop solar generation within the city limits. We haven't had as fast an adoption as other cities, although it is growing much faster this year than in years before. But what can we do as a community, as a city, working with our utilities and our retail electric providers to see that happen more and more? What can we do to increase renewable energy generated outside the city limits? So maybe you live in an apartment, maybe you live with your parents. I mean, there's lots of reasons why rooftop solar might not be the best option for you. There are lots of other options. And part of that is just making people aware of those options. As they become more and more affordable, that will become more and more realistic for more of our population. A lot of it also is advocating for renewable energy and cleaner energy and policies that will advance clean energy at the state and federal level. We talked about climate mayors. That's really at the federal level, but there's a lot we can do at the state level as well. And then investing in green infrastructure and carbon capture technology. So this one is really neat, and it's really special to Houston. A lot of other cities aren't going to talk about this because on the green infrastructure side, right, we have a lot of green space. I think, and the people from the parks can correct me, but we have more park space than any other city in the country. And a lot of that is actually wilderness, right? It's not just a baseball field. That is huge in terms of carbon capture and sequestration. And we have the ability to protect that and to grow it. And that's part of our being such a huge city. It's part of our bayous and everything like that. A lot of work is already going into that right now. But that's something that really differentiates Houston. And then on the carbon capture side, what's so important, and the mayor talked about this a little bit already, is that we are the energy capital of the world, right? And so we are held responsible for a lot of energy in general. Just because we don't actually have oil and gas rigs in the middle of the city of Houston, We are kind of the thought leaders in that space. And so we should use that leadership to help the industry move forward. When we talk about making Houston the capital of innovation, when we talk about bringing startup companies here and competing with Austin, which we absolutely will do, we need to make sure that the next big thing in renewable energy, in carbon capture technology and clean tech comes from Houston. That's how we keep and we maintain that proud leadership as the energy capital of the world. Building optimization, third sector, we talk about reducing energy use from buildings and maximizing savings. So this is kind of hopefully easy. Everyone wants to save money, right? That saves your family money, that saves your business money. Just like cars are becoming more efficient, so are buildings. So we talk about what can we do to adopt newer building and energy codes as they come forward and making sure those are in compliance. And then we just talk about developing programs to improve energy efficiency, and this is really crucial for vulnerable populations, because when we talk about high energy costs, a lot of times that's correlated to extreme weather. While it's lovely outside right now, it's not always quite so lovely, and if nobody wants to be in a situation where they can't afford their AC costs in the summer, right? So there are programs out there right now that we can build upon to make sure that that situation doesn't happen. We talk about expanding investment in energy efficiency. In order to do the first one, you kind of have to have the second one. There are programs out there. PACE is an example, which we love. Centerpoint has a lot of energy efficiency and rebate programs. How do we increase awareness? Are there opportunities to grow those programs? Are there folks within the community who have money they want to contribute to these programs? And then we talk about optimizing building operations, because once you've built the most beautiful, efficient building, it's really important that you train the folks who run that building to operate it properly. Otherwise, it will go haywire and you will not get that return on your investment. And this is a really great opportunity to combine with our Hire Houston Youth program, because you don't just want to train and retrain the folks right now, but you want to start building that pipeline. And the same can be true for renewable energy projects, for clean tech, for some of the transportation and vehicle electrification. We see a lot of this coming to Houston, and so we want to tie into those programs. So we start building this green jobs bank as we go forward. And then finally, materials management. So this is a co-product of our materials management working group, but also our solid waste department is tangentially working on a long-range plan. And we want to make sure that we work in coordination with all of these plans. Sometimes that's a little bit like herding cats, but it's really, important that we work together. And so the things that came up from that group were improving public awareness of sustainable material consumption and disposal choices, right? So if people want to do the right thing, but they don't know how, a lot of times people think they're great in recycling and they're just putting it in the wrong can, and that ends up making that whole can go to waste. We can make that happen. That's easy. That doesn't require really any infrastructure change. It's just teaching people. Sounds a lot easier than it is, but reducing tonnage of landfill waste, right? Right now we are in a good spot, but in the not too near future, our landfills will be at capacity. That has serious problems for the city that we don't ever want to get to. So everyone needs to work together to make sure we are throwing away less. There's lots of different ways to get to that. Expanding our recycling opportunities, innovating them, right? If only there was like a smart cities program that was looking into how we do this and how we can use technology to innovate it, right? Strengthening efforts to reduce food waste and diversion. Again, we can go more into detail, but that could be all day long. And then protecting public health and the environment through optimized solid waste management and operations. A lot of this came as a result of Harvey, because we found that there's your day-to-day operations that you plan for, and then there's that event that happens which you completely didn't plan for, and you end up with months of waste that you now suddenly have to deal with. And so that all has an emissions component, but it's also just a resilience component. It's a public health and safety component. So We are all working together on all types of things. Okay, next steps. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Like I said, this is a draft, and so we are opening the call for public feedback. The plan is posted on our website. If you go to greenhoustontx.gov and click on Climate Action Plan, you can download it. There's a lot of the information that you just saw. There's a little guide that tells you how to use it. And then there's a feedback form that tracks. So if you want to comment on transportation, you want to put your information into transportation. If you want to comment on buildings, goes through. We also want to look for stories and what we call climate champions in Houston. I talked a little bit about changing that narrative. When people think climate change in Houston, we want them to think climate change in Houston and think about how Houston is doing great things, both in response to Harvey and then with an eye looking forward. So if you all know someone, maybe they're a really great recycler, or if you know a business that has a stellar building they want to show off, if you are an oil and gas company that has this super secret technology that for some reason you want to release to the world in our climate action plan, please. We want to highlight the good things that we're doing. A lot of it is city heavy, but it's not just the city, right? This is kind of a shared responsibility. So we want as much input, and feel free to nominate others. That can always be fun, but send us your good ideas. And then finally, our goal is to have a full report out later this fall. And we're asking that people submit their feedback in August. I imagine there will be questions going on throughout this period, but if you really could try to get it in by the end of August, that would be great. And with that, we thanked these guys, but I will thank them again because they were absolutely stellar. Our working group leaders devoted so much of their free time to doing so much of the work. We are a small team, and they were essential, and we could not have done any of this without them and all of the people who took part. So thank you all. And with that, questions? Come on.
So I've heard multiple ways that you're going, that the city is going to approve this plan. I've heard that the mayor can do it all, or city council. We want to support what's been done so far, so which way is this going to go?
So I'm going to say it could go both ways. You are absolutely right. Our primary goal right now is to get a draft that we get lots of comments on, and then we will see where it goes. What's important to note is that this is not a binding document, right? That there are city policies that will have to go through the city policy process, and then there are lots of things that are recommendations, right? We say we should advocate for a higher renewable portfolio standard. City council doesn't have any control over that. So it does not require city council approval for that. Cities do it lots of different ways.
Let me just say, all of the things, let's assume this was the final draft. There are things that as mayor, I can follow. And I can follow.
And for 90% of what we've talked about is something that is already in a city plan, right? So when we talk about electric vehicles, when we talk about the water and wastewater system efficiency, when we talk about parks, right, those are already in their books. We didn't just create that, that's not new. We culled through what everybody was doing and was like, hey, do you realize this has a huge emissions reduction potential? Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. We brought that in. So for the most part on the city side, we feel like we have a pretty well-baked plan. But again, open for comment, still more time to discuss.
On slide 10, the projections, we have quite a few tons coming due next year. Most of them from grid decarbonization and transportation. Any idea how that's going to happen?
So it's a goal to get to 2050. It's not you need to do so much each year. Some years you might have a huge improvement, some years you might not. Depending on how you look at this chart, it is a much more steep curve, and it really turns in 2040, right? And what that means is it's going to take a while for all of the technology to set in. So 2020 is right around the corner. So I cannot tell you what will happen between now and then. Also, conducting the emissions inventory is a really lengthy process, and so you don't want to do it every year because you're going to spend a lot of time and money and you're not going to see a change. So you do it every couple of years. So we will come back when we've had a little more time under our belt to see what impact we've had. Interesting fact, though, the city did an emissions inventory in 2008, I think, and since then, there's been a 16% reduction in emissions. And I won't say that's doing nothing, right, but that was without a real coordinated strategic approach. That was just technology catching up, combined with a huge growth in population, right? So the 16% might have been a lot more if we hadn't had millions of people moving to our city with their cars. So we will see how this goes, and it's not a one and done plan, right? You do your best projections, you give it a little while, you see how they work, you measure, and you come back. And if you need to course correct, that is absolutely okay and expected, right?
Well, I commend not having a hockey stick where everything happens 20, 40 to 50 after we're all dead, or some of us. But there will be points collected along those lines.
And as the mayor said, we have programs that we are already in the process of working on that will be rolled out soon.
Would you, I think I understand this, but would you give an example of grid decarbonization?
So, I mean, from rooftop solar to the city of Houston purchasing renewable energy to you choosing to purchase something. I don't know what kind of electricity or who your provider is right now. Folks at Reliant NRG back there are an example, and I'm calling them out because I see them. They have all kinds of options for what you want to purchase, right? So the more you individually purchase renewable energy, that's how you're going to get the state's number up, right? We are a deregulated city, so the city can't control what kind of energy you and your businesses use. We can only control what we purchase. So it's a little bit harder, right? Which would be easier, the city making one decision or all 2 million of us making individual decisions. But those are the cards we've been dealt, so we have to deal with it. You've already asked. Cargus.
Thank you. I want to take advantage of your answer earlier and ask a key question. But you mentioned green infrastructure and carbon capture technology. Trees.
Don't make me regret this decision, Cargus.
Planting and defending trees in city right away in the curb and the sidewalk would be a great way to get more offsets earlier.
We're doing more and more with trees for use. I believe. We had a presentation on Tuesday last week from a representative from Trees for Use, said that it's an excellent way to use carbon. So there's no question about that. Planting, we have more parks and green space. Okay? Even when we are constructing freeways, it's about building more parks, more paths, more green space. All of that is part of the equation. We talked about the grid. City of Houston, for example, is 8% utilization of wind, 12% solar, and we can do even more. The goal is to get to 100% on renewables. So all of that's taking the landfill out of Sunnyside. There's 178 acres in Sunnyside, low-income community, sitting there. The question now is to repurpose that. And in a few weeks, we plan to lay out a plan where you take those 300 contaminated acres from landfill and turn that into one of the largest inner-city solar farms in the city of Houston, where you're providing that kind of energy. So there are a number of things we can do, we should do, and we can do that now as we move forward. City council comes involved in we talk about contracts, things that we can get with. That's when city council gets involved. Short of that, we move forward. Electric vehicles is another. Okay. So there are a number of things we're doing, the trees, parks, green space, green infrastructure, all are critical components. Flooding, we see sustainability, park and green space, critical parts of that equation.
Jamie, wait. I'll come back to you, I promise. Jamie?
So I just kind of wanted to ask, and I'd ask this of the resiliency team too. I know the complete communities and heard some feedback, a little bit mixed, but one of the things I heard was in the neighborhoods where projects are, to hire people from within the neighborhood. Now, I know that there's a list of approved vendors and everything, but is that something that you'll work with city council to encourage, that there's someone from that area that qualifies for this building?
As a part of our finance plan, we already included that even, for example, the recovery from harm, a part of that is that we encourage contractors and such to utilize people from those respective communities to bring them into the workforce. Okay? So as we are rebuilding homes or repairing homes, it's also about providing workforce skills to people that live in this community. And that's integrated as part of the strategy.
Okay, Tom.
I'm gonna turn around. I've been interested in meeting all the engineers and industrial scientists here. I am the chair of the steering committee for an initiative launched by the American Institute of Chemical Engineers earlier this year. It's called the Climate Solutions Committee. We want to engage all engineers and all industrial scientists to give our views on the best climate solutions from an industry perspective, which of course you pointed that out there. So if you're an engineer or industrial scientist, I'd like to meet you.
In the back, sorry, I can't see you. Yeah.
On the energy transition, you mentioned that you would like to invest some in the parks. And I'm part of a group, maybe called Madres del Parque, where we do some cleaning and recycling. How these plans can support these small groups, to be to let them know that we need about the recycle, the awareness about recycling. How this plan can support these small groups.
So part of this plan has been pulling together within the city and then within the community, groups just like you. And it is a huge, huge city, and I don't have a magic Rolodex of everyone that I need to include, and so we're always bringing people in along the way. But this is the perfect option of how we can reach out to groups like you, get you involved, and then connect you with the folks in the solid waste department that are working on recycling, the folks at parks. Sounds like you have an idea, but you need a place and you need the infrastructure, right? So we can help bring that together. And maybe you have a program that needs to be a recommendation in here. Tell us more. Behind.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm here from the Sunrise Movement. I was wondering if the emissions chart that you just showed, you're using 2014 as the base year, and the Paris Agreement was by 2005. And you just mentioned that you have data from all the way at least 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the reason for choosing 2014?
So the reason for choosing the 2014 data is because when we started, this was the most complete information that we had, and we couldn't use the previous year's inventory because the Paris Agreement and different agreements that have come up since then kind of set the rules for how cities create their emissions inventory. And it's neat because it's designed to be more apples to apples. Before, one city would report one thing, another city would report another, and so they would look very different. This kind of sets the rules. And so you have a level playing field. Cities still look very, very different, but we had to start over with a new set of data. And because we don't own our own utilities, and because we're Texas, and because there's lots of reasons, we don't have access to instant data for some things. You have to go a couple of years back. So there's always going to be a little bit of a lag between the emissions inventory and the plan. Maybe. At some point, maybe we'll catch up, but right now, that's why. Nancy?
How is this plan going to interact with the resiliency plan?
Excellent question. So think about it as on this. Oh, she asked, how does this plan interact with the resiliency framework? When you talk about climate change, think about it as two sides of a coin, right? We're talking about the long-term strategy. We're talking about not causing global temperature to rise more so that 2050 is not as dire as some of the projections. The resiliency side talks about climate adaptation. That's talking about the climate change we're feeling today, right? That's talking about building that resilient city, accepting that our climate has changed, right? We have flooding frequently, we have extreme heat. It's talking about what we do today, and then how do we build Houston forward, and all types of things to make sure that we are prepared for a changing climate. And there's a lot of overlap. A really good example is that our office got funding for a climate risk assessment, because one of the questions that comes up all the time in our meetings is, you talk about extreme heat, you talk about flooding, what should we expect, right? And there are all kinds of national assessments that come out, but we don't have a Houston-specific data set. So we're working with Marissa and the Resilience Office to put that together. And that data will help everyone, but it'll help the city specifically plan.
Let me just add, when you're talking about resilience and resiliency, she's not here.
I think she's in New York.
But resiliency deals with stresses and shocks, okay, on multiple levels. Resiliency deals with transportation. It deals with affordability. It deals with a number of different factors. It is very difficult to build a resilient, sustainable city if you don't address factors that are impacting that. Climate action, climate change impacts everything. If you ignore what's impacting climate change, it's going to be very difficult to build a resilient, sustainable city. They have to be moving in the same direction, because storms are coming with greater intensity and frequency, and when they come, they impact people who are living at the margins, and they fall below the margins. They will impact your transportation system. They impact your energy system. And so you have to deal with them both if you want to be impactful and effective. And what has happened is that we try to build resilient cities, and we ignore what's impacting our climate. And we are going in two different directions. So what we are trying to do in the city of Houston is trying to line everything up and move in the same direction. So you have to have a holistic approach if you're going to have a meaningful outcome. So we have to deal with resilience, and we also have to deal with the climate action change. And you have to do it in the energy capital of the world. Right.
Elizabeth.
I just wanted to take a moment to compliment you on having your climate champions, because I think it's very, very important to underscore the importance of a campaign and letting folks know that this is important to Houston and branding Houston as a clean city. And so I think that's great. What are some of the things that you're going to do to highlight the champions and to sort of begin that campaign?
So our initial thought was, literally in the report, you guys have seen tons of reports, there's like a little, box at the bottom that talks about some company and what they've done, this initiative. Maybe they have a really great carpool program, maybe they put in showers and now everybody is biking to work. The list of possibilities is quite large, and we want to really show that it's happening already, because to your point, we want to show that it is important to how we brand ourselves. It's important to our quality of life here, but it's important to attracting those folks who want to come here, right? But then also there's lots of opportunities, and we would love to do more on the public-private side. Recycling is a really good example of just educational programs to teach the folks in your buildings, in your operations, do this, not this, and see how we can grow on that.
And Elizabeth been very honest. Elizabeth asked for us on electric vehicles, and so which is very, it's major, and it's getting a lot of support, and so that's Elizabeth right. The reality is that it's going to take all of us. The climate action plan is being underwritten by Centerpoint. The chief resilient officer
Okay, Stephanie.
So, actually, echoing the mayor's comments, I'm just so surprised and excited about this amazing turnout here of community members, of nonprofit advocates, of industry, even oil and gas industry. And I think this is really great. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge that you see in implementing the plan? And what are some of the ways that the city's thinking about working through those challenges?
So I'll give you two challenges. One is regulatory, right? We don't have control over a lot of things that would generate faster results. And so that means either we work as a community to make sure that everyone individually makes a personal decision, or we go to the state or the federal level and advocate for policies. It could go either way. I don't know which would be easier, right? Having the state change our renewable portfolio standards, or having a campaign where we get Houstonians to look at different cleaner energy options, right? It's probably a toss-up. Right now, we have to kind of go one path, but we obviously are going to look at the others. And so that's a challenge, and it's across the board. There's a lot of areas where just we don't have the ability that some states like California or New York do, and so they can make instantaneous, broad brushstroke changes. The flip side of that, though, is the cost gets transferred, right? It's immediately put on the end user. So the next challenge, I would say, is just funding, right, for a lot of things, because what we're talking about then says, okay, we recognize this as a challenge, and I'm going to use the Evolve Coalition as a perfect example. The City of Houston is committed to electrifying everything we possibly can in our fleet. Once we hit 100%, we can't go to 110. We're not going to buy extra cars just because, So we recognize that once we go so far, to really move the needle, we have to get out in the community. We have to get out into businesses, into larger fleets. And so Evolve is designed to really bring in those business partners and say, where are you right now? What are your challenges? What would help you adopt vehicle electrification faster? It's saying, well, airports, that's a huge opportunity, but we have to work with the airlines, we have to work with the utility. It's bringing all of that together. So that's going to be it's a process. It's not instantaneous, but that's how we solve things in Houston, right? And we have a long history of doing things in a public-private partnership kind of way. And so it's a challenge, but I think the number one thing is just getting people activated. And the fact that you see folks from the oil and gas industry,
comes in, it's on the ballot in November. We've got to provide people with like rail, bus rapid transit, bus on rubber for the state, on sidewalks, get people provided safer streets, get people provide their bikes, the infrastructure. We have to redesign the city, okay, which means that we have to redesign the city so that it's more walkable, pedestrian friendly. So we're having to change the mindset, and that's not easily done, but we have to do it, which means that transit must move faster than you're moving in your car truck. And we have to use technology so that we can convince people that when they're on the bus or when they're like rail, for example, they can still be on their machines, on their phones, and they can conduct their business. We got to make it sexy and attractive for people to get transit. And we have to make it safe. If people don't want to use public transit if they don't feel safe. So they got to feel safe at the bus stop, the train stop, or walking to. All of those elements have to take place. Same thing for EVs, electric vehicles. We've got to come up with the charging stations so people can charge their batteries quick and keep going. So we've got to make it very convenient for people to make that transition. And then we just need a paradigm shift. Okay? Those are easier said than done, but I think Harvey has helped to expedite things. Okay? Because people recognize you don't want to keep going through a Harvey experience. So you got to change. Mother Nature is demanding that we change. And we have to change. And that's not easy. Change is not easy. But it has to happen. So we have to push it over.
A question about the solar panels. So we have the solar farm at the Calvine, solar farm, and then the solar farm that the mayor spoke about earlier, this plan for the future. As far as solar panels on City of Houston buildings, right now it's just two kilowatt panel and resource buildings. Are there, what do you say are the challenges as to getting more solar panels on the City of Houston property? It's owned by the city instead of owned by a third party.
So that's something that we are always looking into. We would love to have more of that from a resilience perspective. It would be great. Historically, it has not been cost effective, right? That's going to change as time goes by. There's also issues with not all of our buildings would just be optimal. But I welcome you or any other company. I see the folks from Reliant and NRG. I've asked them about this. We have a really large stock of buildings, and we would love to partner with anyone that thinks that they can find a way to make that cost effective or make Houston a great showcase for what you can do, right? So we are happy to talk more about that.
We're open. Okay. We're open for architects and engineers to come up with creative, designing buildings in a very creative fashion that can achieve these purposes. Okay. So we're very open. The conversation I had with the Clean Tech incubator earlier today was how can we utilize city buildings to advance these new technologies and innovations. So we're open. Just has to make sense.
This is for Mayor Turner. You talked about how the resilience plan and this climate action plan are kind of going to be working in tandem. A lot of the things with the resilience plan, we'll be able to see, like you said, in the short term. How do we track the long term? How do we make sure that that happens? When it's not quite as tangible and quite as relevant.
We know the direction in which we need to go. The reality about having the impact on climate change is that we all have to be a part of it. That's why you have now 427 cities across the United States, from red states to blue states, joining together. It's a collective effort, connecting with other global cities around the globe. But it's going to take a collective effort, but everyone has to do his or her part. Okay? So we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to undo it overnight. But the reality is, if we don't change course, it's only going to get worse. So I know, sometimes people want to see, if we do this, it'll bring it down this much. Okay? But it is going to take a period of time in which we are moving together to bring it down. So we have to start. Because to do nothing is to continue to face these storms with great frequency, great intensity. And nowadays it's not about a hurricane. I know this is hurricane season, but let me tell you, anytime a system is coming in our direction, it can drop 6 inches of rain in 10 hours. And you got a problem. Not a hurricane, it's just a system. So we have to address it, we have to face it, and I think that's one of the reasons why you have industry working with grassroots, nonprofits, and other organizations, is because we know we have to protect human life and assets. It's in everybody's best interest. Because I would tell you, 10 years ago, a mayor in Houston probably wouldn't be talking about climate action change. Maybe even 5 years ago. Maybe even 3 years ago, probably. Okay. But things have changed. It's a new reality.
And if I could add on to that, so something that Jose brought up that's really important in previous discussions was this idea of accountability and measuring, right? Measuring and verifying. And on the kind of administrative side, we've seen there's policy changes that the city needs to update to make sure we say, this is something that we do. We do it regularly so that, mayors down the road, city council staffers down the road, know that this is required. And that's not included in here, but that's a part of the process. And then also in terms of the immediate versus the long term, when you download the actual document, you will see it is a combination of things that we want to do by 2050, but we don't know how to, and then the things we want to do with immediately that we're already doing or within the next couple of years. Any other questions? I know it is after 5, and if you all need to go, that's fine. I am happy to stay and answer more questions if you have them. I am thrilled that you all came, and that those of you that took part, thank you so much. Those of you that are just now joining us, please stay connected and be with us as we continue to work on this and help us get more people involved. All right?